Hi, this is Simon. I'm a person-centered counselor in Oxford, and I've been really scared to make video content like this. So I'm just going ahead and filming something, and my hope is that in doing this, I can talk a little bit more about procrastination. So two parts to this. First part of this video is a meditation, like in the title, and the idea behind that is to help you connect with what procrastination looks like for you. There are breaks between, fairly short breaks of say 10 seconds or so. It may be that you choose to pause for longer, and you can do that just by pausing this video. Second part of this video is more about me telling my own story of procrastinating in making this, and what's enabled me to start to push record. So part one, as you listen to this, I wonder if we might try something a bit mindful almost, because I can speak about my experience, but I want to facilitate you to be able to be with yours. So if you'd like to engage with this part of the video, it might be helpful to pause what you're doing and give space to really experiencing this task, experiencing what it is that you're procrastinating on. It may also be that you want to do a light task that holds some of your focus but keeps you open, such as jogging, walking, meditating, something of that ilk. So I want you to picture something that you've been putting off. And that might be something big, like a career move, starting some new program, or that mammoth task that just doesn't feel possible. Or it might be something smaller, like some household chore, calling the friend you've been putting off for a work task. So let's just take 10 seconds and see if something pops up that you're procrastinating on. And if you'd like a little bit longer than 10 seconds in this or on any of the other things I'm going to introduce, then feel free to pause this video. Great. So whatever it is, engage with that thing you've been putting off and notice what's going on for you. You can even close your eyes if you want to, which can help us to switch off from all the other visual distractions and stimuli around us. The next 10 seconds, let's just notice how easy or hard it is to focus on the thing that we're procrastinating on. Perhaps that thing fills your mind, it darts around with worrying, planning, and thinking. Perhaps the opposite, perhaps it's hard to give space for that task. The mind wanders away from it easily. Just notice for these next 10 seconds how hard it is to give space. Notice the effort to thinking about that task. And as you think about that thing you're putting off, you might notice some feelings starting to arise in you. Maybe feelings of dread, fear, anxiousness, maybe a sense of obligation, or even an absence of feeling, maybe a numbness. These next 10 seconds, let's just try and be with that feeling, however positive or negative it might be for you, or even be with the absence of feeling around this task we're putting off. Let's just give some space for it to speak to it and allow whatever's there to be there. Great. So we've identified something we're putting off. We've listened to what comes up for us, for example, feelings towards it. And now we have more of a sense of it. Let's see if we can see what procrastinating is trying to communicate to us, what procrastinating and our response to that task is saying to us. Are there any needs that avoidance or procrastinating are trying to meet in us? Maybe even, for example, it's trying to protect us. Let's just spend some time and see what it's trying to communicate. Thank you again. Next part, let's try and do some imagery. I wonder if we could try playing forwards time a little bit. Let's imagine that we're actually doing that task that we've been putting off. And let's try and notice what comes up to us when we imagine doing it. What feelings, what thoughts, what happens when we imagine actually getting down and doing this task. Thanks. Journeying a bit further still. Imagine how it might feel to finish the task. Maybe there's a sense of release and relief, even a dissatisfaction of getting it done, a fear, maybe accomplishment, could be a pride, something else completely. As we close this initial time of reflection and inner inquiry, let's take another 10 seconds to really acknowledge what came up for us and see if that gives us some insight into why we procrastinate, but the needs it might be meeting for us. Can we thank our procrastination? Can we thank it for looking after us? Perhaps even we can reassure it and tell it it can ease itself now. We don't have to procrastinate on that thing today. Great. Thank you for engaging with this part and being able to not just see what procrastination is doing for you, but also to be really present with it. When we acknowledge something, when we give it space to speak, it's already there. It's often easier to navigate. So in this second part, I hope to talk about my process with procrastination, some of the needs it meets, my way of navigating it, and even learning to respect it. My hope in doing this is that it can help to navigate your own procrastination around a task that you're putting off. And I'm going to be talking specifically about an example. This is very meta. I want to talk about making video content. For me, it had to be just right, and just right never came. So I've been putting off pushing that record button for a while. I mean, I have my excuses in my mind about not being prepared enough to actually do it. And that preparedness looks like not knowing or understanding certain software or hardware, and all those extra little bits that you seem to see on every video, like music, visuals, editing. However, eventually we all need to start, and those tick boxes are what I perceived as important. Blocks put me from actually starting at all. They became more important. I have to know this, or I have to know that. That became more important than actually just cracking on and doing it. And it brings up a similar feeling when I did my first tax return. It felt important to me to do as much research as possible and really make sure everything was printed out, or the bank statements, etc. But the prep work became a symptom itself of the procrastination. And that, alongside this big worry of getting this tax return correct, blocked me from even starting it. And eventually you have to take the plunge and actually really do it. So maybe this is the same with your task. You know the steps you're unprepared for. You know it won't be perfect. Or maybe you're comparing yourself to other people who have done the task better or more efficiently, and that completely stops you from taking action on it. What we don't see is that those others we can compare ourselves to would have also started off somewhere as a beginner to get to where they are now. There's a inspirational quote you've likely heard: "A journey of 1,000 miles begin with a single step." We can do all the prep work and try and be as perfect as possible, but at the end of the day, we have to make that first step or the long journey never begins. So this is my first point in talking about myself. My first point is to make a start. Don't have to be perfect, and you'll likely find that in starting, you actually develop the skills to do the task better if it comes up again, or if you face similar things. It doesn't have to be complete when we start. My second point is about pressure. For me, I felt a pressure to produce video content. I know video is better than articles for search engines, and I felt this booming voice over me saying, "You have to do this." Um, and for me, that demanding voice just makes me want to kind of dig my heels right in. I resist doing the thing and tell myself, it's okay, I'll do it another day. And what I'm not saying is that pressure's bad. Some pressure actually can be helpful. I mean, it's the reason people set things like goals or work well to deadlines, but too much pressure can make a task insurmountable. Lovely word, insurmountable. I mean, I expect for some people listening to this, pressure will feel like this big demand that we must do, and procrastinating or not doing it feels like the only thing you actually can do to have some control over it all. If it's helpful to think about this, I wonder if it's helpful to think about where this pressure is coming from as well. It might be this external thing. So with my tax return, it was this January 31st deadline that must be completed, otherwise you get fines, etc. It might not be an external pressure for you. It might be more of an internal pressure, an internal thing that you should do this thing, but when you try and force yourself to do it, it doesn't really work. Once we've identified where this pressure is coming from, and maybe it's a combination of external and internal, we can start to work out how big it actually is. And more than just working out how big it is, we can start to play a little bit with it and test out this pressure alongside other pressures, the pressures that make us do it, the pressures that kind of make us not want to do it. For me, I know video content will help with my marketing and possibly lead towards some business growth, but much of content creation is a sort of unknown. I mean, I'd love Simon's Listening's counseling services to grow by 30% or so, but at the same time, I'm getting by. So all of this leads to a sort of mismatch. On the one hand, I should make content. And then on the other, that pressure is more, it's up here, it's in my head, because I don't actually know that making content is going to make a difference at all. So that's the pressure towards, that's the doubting of the pressure towards. And I'm going to look at some pressures that actually push against making content and really honor those things that push against, those things that kind of raise all those strong feelings. The first is that producing content means putting myself out there. And that can really open you up to criticism. I mean, we know ourselves, we can be our own worst critic. So if we criticize our tasks, how might somebody else? I imagine I might listen back to it, hear my voice, or see my face about it being kind of mirrored and go, "Oh my goodness, is that me?" Imagine we do a task that we've been putting off, and we can kind of criticize ourselves, and that can be a real block from actually doing the task. It might serve us to not do it, a push factor. A second push against doing the task is that producing content is quite an investment in time. And that time for me can take away from my family or other things I enjoy doing, both professionally and for leisure. The final push factor for me is that producing content, the algorithm, the YouTube algorithm, it likes creators that make regular content. So producing one video can feel like this push to make more and more, like it becomes a lifestyle choice. The first upload is like this dark contract with YouTube that you have to keep feeding. I'm gonna take a sip of tea, and I want to pause for a second and ask myself what I've just done in examining the pressures to do the task, but also the pressures pushing against doing the task, to try and give space for all of them. The ones that are kind of easy to hold, I should do this, and also the pressures that are a bit harder to hold, like actually I'd rather be playing board games downstairs. Pressure for both of those two things. And what I'm doing in entertaining both sides of that is I've taken something big and overwhelming, and I've questioned how important it actually is. I've also given attention to the pressure to not do the task at all. And in doing this, in doing both sides, I've discovered something. I discovered that I actually don't have to make video content at all, nor do I have to make another video after this one. At first, this pressure to make content felt massive, but in reflecting, maybe it actually isn't. Maybe I have a choice. And hell, how much easier are things when we feel we've got agency, when we feel we've got a choice over it? I actually, kind of side point, I have a core belief. This core belief is that I cannot force anyone to do anything. So let's say I do force someone to do something, whatever it is. You have to do the dishes, or you have to walk there, or you must do this exercise. They'll either do it and do it begrudgingly and then lose motivation when it's actually their time to do it because the chore isn't something they've chosen for themselves, or they say, no, sod you, I'm not doing the thing. It's sort of part of a reason why I chose to work as a person-centered counselor. And you might not know lots about different types of counseling, CBT, person-centered, whatever. You might not know lots about different types of counseling as a listener, but person-centered counseling is often called non-directive counseling. The counselor doesn't step in with this big agenda or techniques that they're going to throw out to try and control or make the session flow. It's a collaborative process, and there's something about the riskiness of this sort of relational encounter between counselor and client, between two human beings, and out of that there's this power that kind of is drawn out as the person gains contact with themselves. It might sound jargony, and in many ways I think it might have been easier for me to just learn techniques or do exercises with clients, but for me, I don't think it would work, because I believe what's really effective and what really lasts is discovering our own inner flow. It's a word I keep coming back to, our own inner flow, and being able to tap into that. And I don't think we can force people to discover their own inner flow. Flow really stood out for me last year, actually. I started writing articles on my website. My website's www.simonslistening.co.uk. That's Simons with an S on the end, listening.co.uk. Started writing articles there and on Counselling Directory. And at first I felt this massive pressure. I had to write articles, and I must write articles to get profile views that leads to inquiries. And that's the way to kind of market yourself. And there was this big pressure on me to produce articles, and it was kind of crippling. It was like pulling teeth. I made like 2 articles on that time. Interestingly, one of them was on having a guilt-free rest when we're sick. And I think that's what I was trying to say to myself, just Simon, relax, let go of that pressure. Later on, talking about flow, I unlocked my flow and I started writing content, on subjects that I actually enjoyed. So I've written on subjects like autism, geek culture, a lot of content on running. I got really into running kind of August time, just completed a 10K actually yesterday. I'm still a bit sore from it was a 10K of obstacle courses, and I could talk about running for a long time because I enjoy it. And going with the flow, sort of writing off things that interest me, it can be strange at times. One of my early articles was an article on if Saw, the movies with John Kramer, kind of tortures people to try and help them. I wrote an article on if Saw would rehabilitate a person. which was crazy. It was interesting. 3,000 words of looking at discipline and kind of what helps people and being positive. But what I'm trying to say is that writing from flow has been interesting, and flowing from passion rather than this abstract pressure of content must be perfect suddenly made it easier. It doesn't feel like this great big task I have to do anymore, but more like something I'm choosing to do, and something that flows out within me rather than me kind of flowing to this external force trying to, I don't know, speak to an unknown audience. And even with this, I don't know how much of this content will resonate. It might just be one or two words. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. And that can kind of, again, take away from the pressure of things having to be perfect. My third and final point is actually not about starting the thing we're procrastinating on at all. It's more about sustaining something new that we're trying to do. And for me, two things came up with sustaining it. And the first was discipline, and the second was deconstruction. I couldn't think of a better word than deconstruction. I thought about breaking it down or dissecting, but deconstruction feels like that's what fits the best. So deconstruction. Back of my tax return, the example I gave, back of my tax return, I was fearful of a concept of a tax return and figured it was something that I just had to do. And then when I do it, it will be done. But then once I actually got started, it took me the whole weekend. And I realized there were actually lots of little parts to it. The same with writing articles. I say I'll write an article on whatever resolution, resolving conflict after you've fallen out with somebody, or I'm writing an article at the moment on death anxiety, or producing video content here. I procrastinated not on actually writing it itself. It was more on the concept of what it is. I thought originally, so with producing this video, I thought it was something I'd bash out in an afternoon, that you do and you complete it and it's done. But instead, I found the scripting, kind of getting the ideas of what I'm going to talk about. Even the scripting itself has taken several sessions. And no doubt there's going to be more complexity as I journey into recording and uploading it. And then even more if I work on future videos and think about adding extra parts. What I'm trying to say is that you've not failed if you don't complete your task on the first effort, on the first session, the first moment when you start trying to do your task. Tasks often take time to complete, and more than we thought when we were fearful of this concept of doing the task. So deconstruction, deconstruct that task, take the power out of it, break it down into smaller little bits rather than a black and white, I've either completed it or I have not completed it. See doing the task as a process, like I'm in the process of completing it. The second part of sustaining doing a task is discipline. It's not a great word, discipline, is it? We often think to ourselves, I think, when we're trying to take on something new, a task, we're trying to better ourselves, whatever it is, we often think to ourselves, I'll do it when I feel like it. Trouble is that sense, the feeling of I'll do it when I feel like it, rarely actually comes. Once you've started a task, what sustains us is less about how much we want to do it or how much we're feeling like doing it, and more about our commitment to actually doing it. I mean, I've talked about running that 10K yesterday with the obstacles, great fun. And, that's been kind of training since it's October. I don't wake up every morning and think I really fancy a run. You wake up and some days you feel like it, other days you don't really feel like it, but you get into it. It's about putting aside that time, saying this is when I'm going to do my tasks that I'm training for, I'm working towards, I've struggled with, putting aside time for that task and then developing it. So there are actually two things that inspired me to cover this topic last week and led to this point now. The first was someone in a running group I'm part of, Couch to 5K UK. and they were considering starting the program, but they didn't know how to start. The second was a counselor in a group counseling tutor, and they graduated and they were thinking of opening their own private practice. There's a lot of, again, little things to consider when you're opening your own business. So they also didn't know quite where to start. And for both of them, my advice was fairly simple. I mean, sure, I gave a bit more of a thorough response with some practical things to consider, but my one takeaway piece of advice I wanted to impart was this: start. And I'll say it again: start. Once you've started, you can work on the discipline to keep going. You can break it down into smaller parts, goals, you can grow and you can develop and learn. You can see it as a task to make progress with rather than a binary complete or incomplete. So I think this is the end of what I wanted to say. So I thought let's just kind of wrap it up and summarize, see if I can sort of reflect on what we've said, and maybe one or two things stuck out in your mind, and just give them space to stay there. We did an exercise to engage with our procrastination. We gave it some attention, noticed what feelings and thoughts were roused in us around it, and we used imagery to picture doing it and then even completing the task. And then in the second part, I spoke around three themes. The first was actually making a start, where we talk about the importance of just beginning, however prepared or unprepared we are. The second was about playing with the pressure, noticing the internal, noticing the external pressure, and moving from a kind of obligation place to a place of working from flow, from inner flow. And then the third part was on sustaining the task, and we talked about deconstructing it into smaller parts and putting discipline into progressing it rather than it being a concept of we either have or have not done. So thank you for listening. Please do give this video a like, subscribe to follow my own journey into video content creation. And I genuinely, I mean this, I would genuinely love to read any comments about your own journeys and with procrastination, anything you found useful in starting and sustaining a task. If you do comment on YouTube, I will add the confidentiality clause of just really be conscious that this is kind of out in the public domain. So my advice is generally, if we're commenting on a messaging board or something, talk about what we would like to talk about, but make sure it feels safe for you. The final thing to say, I'll plug myself, is that you can read more about me on my website. You can read some of the articles I've written, like the one on saw or running, etc. My website's www.simonslistening.co.uk. That's simonslistening.co.uk, all as one word. And if you'd like to contact me around counselling, I'd love to journey with you, navigating your own process around procrastination. This is recorded actually using Zoom. So I do face-to-face sessions in Oxford, but many of my sessions are just like this, chatting to people using Zoom or WhatsApp or Google Meets or whatever other online connection you talk with, or phone. And that kind of feels special, I guess, as well, like talking to you, doing this YouTube content, but doing it through Zoom. Anyway, thank you again for your time. And I think of you trying to work on your own procrastination and making progress on doing that thing that you want to do. And I genuinely wish you the best for it. I really hope that you're able to make progress and break it down and I don't know, just find joy in doing it. Okay.